I've always loved hiking. There's something about the silence of nature, the rustling of the trees, and the endless stretch of unknown trails that clears my mind and sets my soul at ease. I'm not some thrill seeker, nor am I looking to conquer the highest peaks. No, I just enjoy the solitude, the peaceful disconnect from the noise of everyday life. But this was different. This hike wasn't peaceful. It was a nightmare that still haunts me. It started like any other trip. I had a few days off from work and decided to take a solo trip to a remote hiking area about 2 hours outside of town. I had heard from a couple of friends that the trails were great, quiet, mostly unmarked, and rarely used. That sounded perfect to me. I arrived early in the morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon as I parked my car at the entrance of the trail. It was one of those perfect, crisp fall mornings. The leaves were starting to change colors, creating a blanket of oranges and reds beneath my feet as I made my way down the path. There was a map posted on a small board near the entrance, but I barely glanced at it. I had my GPS, a compass, and years of experience hiking in more remote locations. I didn't think I needed it. The trail was beautiful, winding through dense trees and occasionally opening up to breathtaking views of the surrounding mountains. It was quiet, so quiet that the only sounds were the crunch of leaves under my boots and the occasional rustle of a squirrel in the underbrush. I was hours in, completely immersed in my surroundings when I noticed something odd. The path, which had been clear and well trodden up until that point, suddenly seemed off. It became narrow, the trees crowding in on both sides, and the ground beneath my feet turned soft and uneven. I stopped, glancing around, trying to remember if I had taken a wrong turn. But no, I was sure I had stayed on the trail. I pulled out my GPS to check my location. Nothing. The screen showed I was in the middle of nowhere, not even near any marked paths. That didn't make sense. I had been following the trail the whole time. I checked my phone, no signal, of course, but I had expected that. This area was pretty remote. I decided to keep going, thinking I'd eventually find my way back to the main trail. After all, it wasn't uncommon for GPS to fail out here, and I had my compass to guide me. So I pressed on, confident that I would loop back around. But after another hour of walking, I still hadn't found anything familiar. The trees seemed to be getting denser, the sky darker, even though it was only mid-afternoon. The further I went, the more unsettling everything felt. The forest, once so serene, now felt oppressive. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves, made my heart race. I was no longer enjoying the quiet, I was dreading it. It was as if the woods were watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. And that's when I saw it. The cabin. It appeared out of nowhere, nestled between the trees like some relic of a forgotten time. It wasn't large, maybe a one-room structure, but it looked old, like it had been there for decades, if not longer. The wood was dark and weathered, the windows grimy with age. There were no lights on, no sign of life. Just this eerie, silent cabin standing in the middle of nowhere. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to it. I was lost, after all, and maybe someone lived there who could help. I approached cautiously, calling out as I neared the door. "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the thick silence of the forest. No answer. I knocked on the door, the wood creaking under my fist. Still nothing. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I should have turned back right then. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave, to go in the opposite direction. But I didn't. I opened the door. Inside, it was dark. The only light came from the few cracks in the walls where the sun managed to seep through. It smelled musty, like the place hadn't been lived in for years. The furniture was sparse, a wooden table, a couple of chairs, and a bed pushed against the far wall. There were no personal items and no signs that anyone had been there recently. As I stood there, my eyes adjusting to the dim light, something caught my attention on the table. A map. It was old and yellowed, but it looked like a map of the area. I rushed over to it, hoping it could help me figure out where I was. But as I looked closer, I realized this map wasn't like any I'd seen before. It didn't show any of the usual landmarks. No rivers, no roads, not even the trail I had been following. Instead, it showed the woods surrounding the cabin, with dozens of tiny, hand-drawn symbols scattered throughout. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about the symbols looked wrong. I couldn't explain it, but they made me uneasy, like I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to see. Suddenly, a sound from behind me broke the silence. It was faint, like a soft creak of wood, but in the quiet of the cabin, it was deafening. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the room. The door was still closed, and there was no sign that anyone had entered. But something had moved. I was sure of it. I backed away from the table, my hand instinctively reaching for the doorknob. That's when I saw it, a shadow, just outside the window. It was quick, barely a blur, but it was there. Someone, or something, was watching me. I bolted for the door, not bothering to look back. My mind was racing, panic setting in as I stumbled out of the cabin and into the forest. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just needed to get away. But no matter how fast I ran, the feeling of being watched never left. I could hear footsteps behind me, the soft rustling of leaves as something followed me through the woods. I don't know how long I ran. Minutes, hours, it all blurred together in my mind. My legs were burning, my lungs screaming for air, but I couldn't stop. I didn't stop until I burst out of the trees and into a clearing. There, in the distance, I saw something that filled me with both relief and terror. My car. But how? I had been walking in the opposite direction for hours. I should have been miles away from the trailhead, and yet there it was, sitting exactly where I had left it that morning. I didn't question it. I sprinted toward the car, fumbling with my keys as I threw open the door and collapsed into the driver's seat. I drove faster than I ever have in my life, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see if something, or someone, was following me. I just needed to get as far away from that place as possible. When I finally reached home, I tried to make sense of what had happened, but nothing added up. The map, the cabin, the shadow, it all felt like a nightmare. But when I looked at my GPS, I realized something even more unsettling. It still didn't show my location. The entire area where I had been hiking didn't exist. No trails, no landmarks, not even the cabin. It was as if I had been walking through a place that wasn't supposed to be there, a place that didn't exist. I haven't been back to the woods since. I still love hiking, but now, whenever I think about going out on the trails, I remember that cabin, the map, the shadow, and I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for someone else to stumble upon it. Waiting for someone who wouldn't be as lucky as I was. Because I'm certain of one thing, whatever was in those woods that day, it wasn't human.